They say you're supposed to be able to tell the character of a man by the company he keeps. And I think that's true of organizations too. And looking at the people on this dais and the people in this room, I think it's pretty clear that Refugees International has an extraordinary character.
On behalf of Kathy and myself, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Your support is truly helping to make a difference in the lives of refugees around the world.
And this event helps us to celebrate our organization's 31 years of life-saving advocacy for people around the world. Many of you are here tonight to pay tribute to one of the world's great humanitarians, Ken Bacon. Ken's friends have done so much to honor his life and his work, and your generosity tonight is no exception. In fact, your dedication to Ken's legacy and to our humanitarian mission has helped make this the most successful gala in Refugees International's history. We have raised about $725,000 tonight, which is amazing.
Welcome to everybody. Laurel and I are delighted to host Refugees International's first Green Gala.
The Embassy of Finland and Pekka and I are very pleased to support Refugees International and their work in bringing attention to climate change displacement, and we look forward to a continued partnership with you and, of course, with the newly inaugurated Ken and Darcy Bacon Climate Center.
You felt his decency and honesty, his readiness to face facts and still reach for better things before you could name them. His character perfectly matched RI's mission. He made us better at it. Ken was a visionary, always ahead of the curve.
We want you to leave tonight with some understanding of the tremendous impact Ken had on the people who were lucky enough to call him boss, colleague, friend. Through the words of those who knew Ken, we will hopefully convey the incredible contribution he made to improve this world of ours. Kofi Annan, who traveled with Ken to Darfur. Throughout my term as UN Secretary General, I had the privilege of working with Ken on several occasions. He will be remembered for his diplomatic skills, sharp intellect, his extraordinary human qualities, and for his exemplary service to the refugees of this world.
Senator Ted Kennedy, in a letter to Ken just days before his death. I want you to know again, dear friend, how much your life and work have meant to hundreds and thousands of vulnerable refugees across the globe, and to all of us who care about the issue. Refugees love you, I love you, and the Kennedy family loves you too.
From President Barack Obama in a letter to Ken. You have been a vocal spokesperson for many of the world's most vulnerable populations, the refugees, internally displaced persons, and victims of conflict whose interests are advanced by Refugees International. Your integrity and willingness to speak up and speak out have brought dignity to the cause of people who so desperately need others like you to advocate on their behalf. Thank you for a life well lived, for causes that are truly doing God's work here on this earth. Crystal Eunice, who worked as an advocate at RI with Ken for 3 years, said this: Ken is without a doubt one of the best people I have ever met. I was in Iraq with Ken last March. The cancer had already spread to his brain, though he didn't know it then, and yet despite being sick and older than I, he had an energy that I could only envy. I would wake up in the morning to find that Ken had already been to the gym, written a blog post, and made a few phone calls to set up meetings, and I would go to bed before him after long days spent admiring the way he handled diplomacy, militiamen, and aid workers alike, with grace and intelligence, always knowing how best to reach out to them in the interest of displaced citizens. But mostly, I was inspired by the time he took to listen to each individual refugee story. Every person mattered to Ken, and every tragedy he heard about became his own. I cannot count the times I saw Ken moving mountains to help one single refugee, anonymously and without ever expecting any praise for it.
This final tribute is from Allah Majid, an Iraqi refugee. After 15 months of battling to bring my 2 boys from Iraq to the US, Ken was the only person to save them, save me from losing hope that I would see them again. He was able to help me see them again 3.5 years after I was separated from them. Never am I going to forget him. I will always see him every time I look in my boy's eyes. Rest in peace, dearest Ken. I love you. And now, let's hear a few words from Ken.
And at the end of the day, what Refugees International brings is a focus on problems that are destabilizing regions of the world. And a world with less displacement is a world that's more secure, more prosperous, and more peaceful.
With Ken's words in our ears, we welcome Ken's wife, Darcy Bacon.
When I met Ken, we were both juniors in college, and he was planning to get a PhD and become an English professor. After he spent a summer in Chicago working for the Wall Street Journal, he realized that he liked change. He liked waking up every day to a new challenge, which made being president of Refugees International pretty much the perfect job for him. In 25 years as a writer and editor at the Journal, change meant changing beats. He went from the post office to the Treasury, from health and education to arms control and banking. But his favorite beat was the Pentagon. In 1994, Bill Perry, who'd been a great source and is one of the world's great people, asked Ken to become spokesman for the Pentagon. It was during the war in Kosovo that he learned about the crisis facing the world's refugees. The people who'd fled in fear over the border into camps in Macedonia were the suffering human face of an unpopular war. And they were only a tiny fraction of the world's refugee population, more than 5 million souls. 2 weeks after leaving the Pentagon, with its budget and its staff, he started at RI, where the budget was bare bones, and he worked with a small, overstretched, incredibly talented, and hardworking staff. He went multiple times to Darfur and came home twice with typhoid fever. He began to see a common thread in many of the crises and enduring tragedies, the environment and climate change, as a cause of human misery and conflict, whether it was the spread of the desert fueling war for land in Darfur, or storms, earthquakes, and rising sea levels driving millions from their homes in Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Burma. He saw estimates that 50 to 200 million people could be displaced in the next 5 decades. Ken wanted Refugees International to be in the forefront of preparing for these changes, providing protection for people who would need it. July 14th, when doctors told us he had a month to live, Ken went up to his office at home and wrote a letter creating a center for the study of climate displacement at RI to carry forth his vision. I agree it could use a shorter name, and I'm fine with me if mine weren't in it. Ken would be thrilled by its progress. Joel Charney has worked very hard when he was wearing several hats this year to lay the essential groundwork. Alice Thomas, a lawyer with deep experience in the environment and human rights, will direct the center under Dan Glickman's capable leadership. I know I speak for Ken when I say how honored he would be by the tribute you've paid him tonight. But most of all, he would salute Laurel and Pekka, Gay and Kathy, Vicki and Roger, the extraordinary staff and board of RI, with whom he was so honored to work for 9 years, 8 years, I guess, and all of you for being here tonight to support the life-saving work of RI as it grows and changes to meet the challenges of the future. Thank you so much for him.
Dan Glickman really needs no introduction, but I will say a few words about him. He was a member of Congress for 18 years from Kansas. He was the Secretary of Agriculture for 6 years. He really has spent a great deal of his time in eradicating hunger in the United States and abroad. Now, most recently, Dan did serve as the chairman and the CEO of the Motion Picture Association of America. And he has worked with individuals who are very much in the spotlight. And we know that he, with his experience and network, that he is going to help bring RI in the spotlight as well.
This is an amazing man, Farooq Kathwari. I just want you to know that he's a dedicated public servant, but he was a refugee himself. He and his family were separated due to conflict and political strife during his childhood. He came to the United States from Kashmir in 1965 seeking political asylum, and he went to work for a company called Ethan Allen Furniture. And working hard with perseverance, the American dream, he became this chairman and CEO of one of the largest companies of its kind in the world. But he's given his time and effort here at Refugees International. And so, Farooq, I want to present you this gift. Unfortunately, it weighs 95 pounds, so I can't pick it up very easily. Well, you did a very good job.
How fitting that tonight's winner is Bill Frist. This is a worthy successor to other winners from Kofi Annan to Ted Turner. But we worked together on HIV/AIDS, where again, he played a remarkable role in forging a bipartisan consensus on a global program to fight HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis by forging a bipartisan coalition stretching from Jesse Helms to Barbara Boxer. If you think that's easy, you don't know anything about Congress. This coalition created the finest single program in foreign policy of the previous administration, the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, which continues to this day. But Bill Frist is much more than an ordinary politician. He's a great humanitarian, and he's a great surgeon. He goes to the Sudan at least once a year, since at least 1997, to operate on the desperate refugees in those camps in that tragic land. He went to Haiti as soon as the hurricane hit. So I ask you all to join me in welcoming a great humanitarian, a great friend, a great representative of our country overseas and in Washington, Bill Frist.
People, and many of you are old-timers at this dinner, but I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of you who are new-timers at this dinner, and I want to encourage you to keep coming back. I say firsthand, I'll tell you just one very quick story. People like behind-the-scenes stories, and even though most of you are from Washington, D.C., most of you have not been on the Senate floor during the times that we're in session. And I'll take you back about 8 years, and it was about this time at night, about 9:30 at night, and it was late July, and the Majority Leader and Joe Lieberman knows better than anybody, the majority leader has no power at all. So it's a tough job. You have no power, but everybody thinks you've got power. But the one thing that you can do that nobody else can do in the country, the majority leader, not the Democratic or the Republican leader per se, but just the majority leader, the one thing you can do is reach out among the thousands of pieces of legislation and pick it out and bring it to the floor of the United States Senate. And that's really what the authority is, making things happen based on an agenda. And at that time, again, 7 to 8 years ago, it was July. We were going to go on our August recess the next day, 30-day break. And I just happened to be going back quietly to spend about 2 weeks there doing surgery in southern Sudan. And they're the good guys and the bad guys. It's kind of hard to know who is who, so you treat everybody just the same, of course. And you see how medicine and health really can be used as a currency for peace. So I had all this planned out. But at the time, Darfur is something I'd been following because I'd been in Sudan going every year for 6 years doing surgery. And I'd seen the HIV/AIDS, the displacement, working with refugees. And then up in the Darfur region, we started hearing about these deaths. And we started hearing that people would be moving around Sudan. And Sudan's a big country, about the third of the size of the United States, a big country. People started coming south and started telling these stories while we were on the ground. And so there was a resolution brought forth by some House members and people like Sam Brownback, who was honored last year, on genocide in Darfur. Now the problem is it had never been called genocide. And in fact, at that time, the State Department didn't want it called genocide. When something's called genocide, it gets elevated quickly and all sorts of very legal, very specific things kick in. And I said, no, from being on the ground, and this is where RI is, they're on the ground, they're recording, they're listening. The issues around dignity, around human rights, around health, that's what RI does. They listen, and then they translate back to Washington, D.C. and give voice for those people who have no voice, and thereby change policy. So at 9:30, I said, we're going to take it to the floor. And all of a sudden, these calls started going back from wherever we are now, the Capitol from the White House. No, don't take it to the floor. We're not ready to call it genocide. And I said, I'm going to take it to the floor. It got to be 9:15. The House was being supportive. And again, messages were coming over now from the State Department. No, don't. We'll do it, but we'll do it on our time. And I said, well, when is that going to be? Thousands of people have died and are being killed on our watch. And we started thinking back to Rwanda, started thinking back to other times where we thought we were doing what's right, but we didn't do what's right. And then it got to be 10 o'clock, and we took it to the floor. And we called it genocide for the first time. And then 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, the State Department called it officially genocide. I tell that story not so much for that. It gives you kind of a background feel of how things are done and why it's important for you, meaning RI, the volunteers, the paid staff, to get these messages up directly to Washington, D.C., which is what you do. But the real part of the story is that later that night, I was going into Sudan the next day, July 31st or whatever, and my visa was canceled because President Bashir didn't like me calling it genocide and knew I was the one who brought it out. And so all of a sudden my visa was gone, so I couldn't get to the Sudan. But we went ahead and flew into Nairobi, went over to Uganda, then flew over to Chad to come in through the refugee camps on the west because we had a medical team at the time. And we did just that. And the interesting thing there, again, this is before Darfur became the issue of focus pretty much, just 2003, right through that area. In the refugee camps in Chad, there were about 9 of them along the border, although you know that Chad is right west of the Darfur region. Refugees coming across the border. When I was there, we would go and talk to individuals to assess them medically, and somebody was there taking notes, asking them about health care, asking them about were these rapes really occurring? Were the helicopters coming in? Is that real? Are you sure that on those helicopters, they were military helicopters? And I said, who is this person? Why are they asking all this? And sure enough, it was RI on the ground. And here I was a senator, but not a senator. I was really there as a medical person, coming side to side to deliver health care with your representatives. And then sure enough, about 6 weeks later or 8 weeks later, we would jump all the way through the system and I would be back being Majority Leader of the United States Senate with that report of RI coming back, with that sort of lobbying going on, that sort of advocacy going on to change the direction of our attitudes and of our government. And I tell this straight because nobody knows that kind of stuff. That's the way it works. I may be boots on the ground, I may be doing the surgery, I may be spending time in Mozambique and Rwanda doing it, and South Africa doing it, and the Congo doing it. But RI is there linking all of that to change in the direction of the country and of policy. And all that translates down, instead of 2 million people dying and 5 million people being displaced, it becomes minimized over a period of time. And that's the linkage I've been blessed to see. And I want to share that with you because that's the way it works. That's why these dollars are so important. The award tonight I do accept in that spirit, a spirit of service, not my service. I'm a surgeon and I'm down on the ground doing things, but the service that the 3 people who died, how they died, where they died, and serving people who have no voice, who don't have advocates. As a senator, people come in all the day asking for themselves and their families and maybe their immediate communities, but rarely, if ever, do they come in and argue for these faceless 41.6 million refugees today around the world. That's RI, and that is what's done. And so I do accept this award. It means a great deal to me to be able to take it representing the work that we have yet to do.